types of jab. So usually when we're working on the jab, right, we focus on this a whole lot, right? Elbow down, rotate from the wrist and the forearm, get the shoulder up to protect the chin, right? So it's kind of the most basic form and function jab, right? The whole point is a straight punch. You want to be able to get it to go straight. You want it to be consistent. You want it to give you biofeedback. You want to make sure you get it turned over at the end, and you want it to drive straight forward. That being said, that's not the only way to throw a jab. And so I got a couple different examples here of the way that different professional boxers, some of the greats, threw different jabs. Some of them had more tools than others. But you'll see that there's kind of a consistency in the way that each one of these guys threw their jab, and you don't see a lot of people talk about it, so I figured it'd be good to go over this. So Roberto Duran, right? Everybody knows Hands of Stone. His jab, interestingly enough, he was very fast, but he didn't always throw his jab fast. And especially when you watch videos of him when he's kind of warming up, he throws a very kind of slow but deliberate jab, and his elbow's usually somewhere at like the 8 to the quarter position, like outward. And he'll throw it, and then he would step into it to snap it. Now, when he was on the move, a lot of the times he would pull his head offline into the step, and then would throw the jab with a little bit more of an arc in the elbow. And he was pulling his head offline, and it was usually because he was getting ready to set up his two. That was kind of his thing. And what you'll kind of notice with a lot of fighters, particularly from the 70s through the 90s, is they would throw a lower jab, either with kind of like an up jab feel, where it was like a little bit of an uppercut. It's what I call the up jabber cut. For Lennox Lewis especially, because he would throw this, he'd be in this position, would throw this jab, and then would bring his crossover. Roberto Duran did that to a slighter extent. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna work on having a little bit further out position. The elbow's gonna be allowed to come out a little bit, nice and relaxed, open up so you can see. And we're just gonna throw the jab slow and deliberate. And I just want you to work on kind of getting the feel for stepping into it especially. And then when you're comfortable with that, try moving off to the left and then throwing across. That's gonna transition well into the Lennox Lewis. And then I'll show you the up jabber cut. So, pros with throwing like that, and even more so, right? If this is a 1/8 to 1/4 of an elbow flare, Lennox Lewis is like a turn it all the way over. And pros and cons. When you throw it like this, less telegraph. But if you're moving a lot and your opponent's moving a lot, especially if you're planning on moving offline and to your left, to your lead side, there is one distinct advantage, especially if you double up. And my preferred method, if I'm gonna use that elbow out like lead cross kind of jab, is to throw the first one straight with a step, and then the second one like that. Because if I effectively move off my opponent's center line and he doesn't adjust, if he stays in place, or if he tries to do like a catch, especially if he tries to double catch or catch slip, that second shot's gonna come around and hit him on that second opportunity because his hand's gonna be here. So a lot of the times the people like Lennox Lewis, who threw a jab almost exclusively like that, rotating it so that the elbow came out so that they'd be able to come around the rear right hand or the rear defensive arm. Yeah. A lot of it was because they expected this, or their opponent to not move correctly. Or they expected their opponent just to step out, probably trying to step back or to try like a pull counter. That elbow out lead cross type of jab is perfect for somebody who's gonna try to slip out because it's gonna come around and it's gonna hit him in the cheek. So there's a very specific utility, particularly among more advanced fighters. So the other thing is, as a setup, Lennox Lewis would do it like this and then would just switch to a lead hook. And he had so much power because, I mean, especially when he got later in his career, And he bulked up. When you look at him in the beginning of his career and the end of his career, he got huge. He's a giant man by the end of it. He would be able to knock you out with that, just a pow. And so, especially in retreat, he would back up to his left and would throw that as a hook, and it would almost always come around. The other thing is Lennox Lewis would throw a jab like this, an up jab, which could be technically an uppercut. We kind of talked about how punches are on a spectrum, but he would be here or he would be here and he'd drop that hand, and then he would throw an up jab, lazy up jab, and then a hard up jab. And what would happen is he'd separate the guard, and then he would throw his right hand, which is usually kind of a blend of a cross and an overhand. And he would shift his weight over because he would set up the movement coming over by getting that hand up. He'd either hit you in the chin and pop your head up, and then that overhand or that cross would come between the guard, which he opened up the space for with that lead uppercut or that up jab, and he'd just go bang. And he had immense precision. And so that shot would just come straight in and it would knock his opponent out. So now we're gonna try what I call the up jabber cut. So we're gonna be here and we're gonna step off line, and you can either throw it thumb up like that, which is kind of the older school way, or you can thumb out, throw like that, and then I want you to throw across. Mayweather has kind of like the apex of the elbow out. What Mayweather does perfectly, though, is go from here to here, where he still has a structure in the punch, back to here. And because all he has to do is change the elevation of where that jab is coming from, he can make it look different. He can punch from low to high. He can punch high, low, or he could just punch straight. That's why I like to call it the ambiguous jab, because from here, he could throw it anywhere. And then when he wants to feint, he'll just change the location of that lead elbow. And especially because you could tell he worked it. That guy's probably throwing 10 million to the punch, because he throws it with power and intent every time he throws it. And he doesn't have to pull it all the way back because he's got a good structure right here. He's got everything in the right position to send the fist with deadly intent. One of the best jabs out there. Kind of like Pernell Whitaker, like in his early days, he had a super devastating jab. The only thing is you don't see it a lot because he was a very defensive fighter, and so he would move his head a whole bunch and counterpunch. And people thought he had a weak jab, but then, he probably threw 10 jabs in a fight. That's an exaggeration, obviously, but you'd see him just blast somebody's head back, and then he would throw this like exaggerated overhand, but then be moving his head way offline and then be moving in a completely different direction by the time you could even try to get your composure back. But yeah, so we're right here, right? And we're just, Yeah.
Yeah,
It feels very weird, doesn't it? It's difficult to master, right? You have to specifically train that jab, but Mayweather trained like no other human being I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So my coach called him up one day while he was retired the first time, and he was like, in the gym. My coach asked him what he was doing, so I was like, all right. So, Lomachenko. Lomachenko was one of the smoothest, slickest fighters, right? He had some background in dance, but throws very, very straight punches, but then has some of the best offline movement you'll ever see. And when I train my straight jabs and my straights, it's always kind of with this in mind, kind of mixed with this. Again, Lennox Lewis was my favorite heavyweight growing up. And what I appreciated about Lennox Lewis was he would commit when he had to commit, and he wouldn't when he wouldn't. Lomachenko did the same thing. It's just that what I generally teach to novice boxers aligns much more with this, because you kind of have to be at a higher skill level to be able to achieve these things. This is a little bit easier right out the gate to achieve. It's just that Lomachenko took those basic fundamental principles and then just, did them to the nth power. But his big thing was because of his superior sense of timing and rhythm, he was able to vary his very straight punches in the timing, the rhythm, and the intensity. And every time he throws the same combination, he would add some kind of different head movement to it. So he could throw a 1-1-2 or a 1-2-1, and it would seem like 5 different combinations simply for the fact that he could change the rhythm, timing, and intensity of every punch, which is, again, why I think he was one of the greatest fighters. Some people didn't like him because he didn't have a huge amount of power, but he was also fighting in like the 130 range. So we have to keep these things in mind. But because this is so much like what I normally train, we can kind of bypass this one. Golovkin threw from a higher position a jab that very much kind of mimicked the Mayweather one, where his elbow would come out or it would stay in like the quarter position, and he would sometimes flare the elbow out. And that elbow flare, if you remember earlier, I talked about throwing it straighter and then flaring the elbow out. Well, Golovkin had a fairly formulaic way of moving forward. He'd move forward 2 steps, usually over to the right with 1 step. 2 steps forward, 1 step over to the right. You know what it did? It automatically funneled his opponent into one of the corners. And it was such a simple but brilliant strategy to being able to dominate his opponent, especially because he had a devastating set of punches. And so he threw it was enough of a jab to get the job done, in the sense that he didn't have to think about it. He just kind of threw it, but he had a really hard right hand and his hooks were just devastating. So that, coupled with his movement of forward, forward, over, forward, forward, over, forward, forward, over, was kind of the way that he would just generically force people up to the rope or straight into the corner, usually effectively into the corner. And then that's where he would begin to really start. And he was good about moving offline whenever he threw his hooks. He always stepped in and threw his hooks. So what we're going to work on now is I want you to move forward, close range into the bag, and then come offline and throw a big hook.
Either right or left.
All right, so with Golovkin, we got that quarter elbow position, right? Gives you a lot of torque to go into that, right? Because you're activating less tricep, but you're activating more shoulder. I don't like it because typically it telegraphs. Straighter the jab from here, significantly less telegraph. However, faster, or not faster necessarily, but more convenient power from getting that turnover. Again, I prefer a straight jab. That's the whole other thing. But the other thing, Golovkin kind of mirrored his right hand off of what his jab was doing. Bang! And so it was almost always a cross. But it was a hard cross, and because he was always focused on getting that lateral movement through his natural forward, forward, over, he would always be in position to be able to throw a cross all the time. So it worked out. Now, Canelo threw a very straight jab. He throws a very hard jab and does a very good job of not telegraphing it. So the other thing is he's got extremely nuanced feel to every punch. When he wants to touch you, he'll touch you. When he wants to hurt you, he'll hurt you even with a jab. And it's a very straight jab. And Canelo's head movement improved significantly after he fought Mayweather. Now, say what you will about that fight. A lot of people were displeased because they fought what they thought was a fight that Canelo was not ready for. But he learned a lot from it, and then Canelo just became a machine afterwards. And now you can see how evasive he is based off his head movement, right? Didn't have that before Mayweather. And so sometimes things like that are formative in people's careers. Now Canelo is one of the best. So it's important to remember form and function. I am always one that says function over form, but you have to remember that the two are inextricably linked. And if I had to point out one of my own weaknesses as an instructor is I always say, function over form, but I should remember both. So, yeah, I'm here telling you that. But again, so it's very straight. So now what I want you to do for the last couple minutes is just work on throwing those different jabs. Throw it hard. You could try one of these other ones that we worked on today, and then throw it soft, and then switch back to whatever you're most comfortable, and then try to throw it hard. And what you'll do is you'll develop a sense of touch. And people often neglect to teach people how to have feel in their punches, because it's just another way to make the punch seem different and make it harder for the other person to try to block.
Yeah, I mean, if you wish I could come after the same all the time, and sometimes it's only intended just to tap you.
Yep.
And you can do this. You could do that same punch.
Yeah.
And only actually throw it with power. Yeah, that would be.
And now all of us, yeah, if you expect it to just touch you and then bow, you get banged with it, makes a big difference. That's why I like throwing them